I spent 30 years trading sweat and scars to build a foundation, only to have my own son ban me from my grandson's graduation. My oil-stained work boots simply did not fit his fake high society aesthetic. He thought locking me out of that rooftop club was a victory. He had no idea the mother he just rejected was secretly holding the $10 million death warrant to his entire tech empire. Arrogance always has a heavy price. Hello, dear listeners, and welcome back to James Revenge Stories. Unfortunately, YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, leaving us with zero budget to keep the lights on and pay our hardworking team. If you enjoy today's story, please consider supporting us with just $1 by scanning the PayPal QR code on your screen, or clicking the link in the description and pinned comment so our staff can pay their bills and continue creating these stories for you. My name is Gianna Nichols. I am 48 years old, and I own Titan Freight and Salvage. The afternoon sun was beating down mercilessly as I stood in the dead center of my shipping yard. The air tasted of diesel fumes, hot asphalt, and sea salt. All around me, massive cranes hoisted rusted metal containers, and 18-wheelers roared to life, kicking up clouds of thick gray dust. This was my kingdom. I built it from the absolute bottom, clawing my way up through a male-dominated industry with nothing but sheer willpower and calloused hands. In those rough hands, I held a heavy drop-forged steel wrench. I had carried this exact tool in my overalls for 30 years. It was the wrench I used to fix my first broken-down rig on the side of a frozen highway when I was flat broke and desperate. Today, however, it was not meant for fixing engines. It was going to be part of a very special gift. My grandson Leo was graduating college early at just 17 years old. The boy was a certified prodigy, a quiet, brilliant kid who felt like the only pure and genuine thing to ever come out of my son's bloodline. I had spent hours polishing that old steel wrench until it gleamed like silver. I placed it inside a custom velvet-lined mahogany box right next to an antique gold pocket watch. To me, it was the ultimate symbol, a heavy physical reminder that no matter how high his brilliant mind took him into the academic stratosphere, he must always remember the grueling, dirty grind that built his family's foundation. I wiped a smear of thick black motor oil from my cheek with the back of my canvas sleeve and pulled out my phone. I dialed my son Mason. He was 34 years old now, though he still acted like an arrogant child playing dress-up in his custom-tailored Italian suits. The phone rang 3 times before the line clicked open. "Mason," I said, projecting my voice to cut through the deafening blast of an air horn from a reversing truck behind me. "I am finishing up my shift at the yard. What time should I head over for Leo's graduation party tonight?" There was a long, suffocating silence on the other end of the line. It was not a surprised silence. It was the calculated, guilty hesitation of a cornered coward frantically trying to find an exit strategy. "Mom," Mason finally stammered, his voice tight and unnaturally high-pitched. "Listen about the party. Things got a little complicated with the schedule, and we had to make some last-minute adjustments." Before he could spin whatever pathetic, cowardly lie he was crafting, the phone was violently snatched away. I heard the sharp, unmistakable click of a manicured acrylic fingernail tapping the microphone. It was Chloe, my daughter-in-law. A woman whose entire existence and personality were built on flashing designer labels and swiping maxed-out credit cards. "Gianna," Chloe sighed, her voice dripping with the kind of condescending, sugary sweetness you would use to scold a dirty stray dog. "Mason is simply too polite to say it to your face, so I will do it for him. The graduation party already happened. It was last Saturday at the Skyline Terrace Club downtown." My calloused grip on the heavy phone tightened until my knuckles turned white. "Last Saturday, you threw my only grandson's graduation party, and you did not even tell me." Chloe let out a sharp, breathless laugh that sounded exactly like breaking glass. "Oh, please do not make this a massive Greek tragedy, Gianna. You have to understand our position right now. Mason is pitching his new artificial intelligence tech startup to top-tier Silicon Valley investors this month. We had tech billionaires, angel investors, and venture capitalists at that party. We simply could not risk you showing up in your scuffed steel-toed work boots and parking your mud-covered, obnoxious pickup truck out front. It would completely pollute the elite tech CEO image Mason has worked so incredibly hard to build. You do not exactly fit the aesthetic of our social circle." The line went dead. She hung up on me. I did not cry. Tears are a pathetic luxury for people who have time to waste, and I had spent my entire adult life learning how to convert raw emotional pain into high-octane fuel. I stood perfectly still amidst the chaotic, deafening noise of the freight yard. The roaring diesel engines, the metallic crashing of shipping containers, the gruff shouts of my yard foreman. All of it faded into a dull, distant hum. The sheer disappointment I felt did not break me. Instead, it hardened instantly, crystallizing into an ice-cold, razor-sharp calmness that chilled me to my core. I looked down at the polished mahogany box in my grease-stained hands. Leo still deserved his gift. The boy was innocent in all of this shallow corporate theater. He needed to know his grandmother was immensely proud of him, even if his snobby parents were deeply ashamed of her. I climbed into the cab of my battered Ford truck, the exact vehicle Chloe despised so venomously, and drove across town. I drove away from the industrial grime of the docks and up into the pristine, manicured hills of the gated community where Mason and Chloe lived. Their house was a multi-million-dollar monstrosity constructed entirely of smart glass, imported black steel, and sterile white concrete walls. It looked less like a family home and more like a soulless corporate lobby. I parked my truck a block away, fully intending to walk up, leave the wooden box on the front porch, and drive off without causing a single scene. But as I approached their massive wrought iron security gates, I stopped dead in my tracks. A massive fleet of luxury catering vans was parked bumper to bumper in their sweeping circular driveway. Dozens of workers in crisp white uniforms were frantically hauling out towering floral arrangements, dismantled champagne pyramids, and massive velvet banners that read, "Congratulations, Leo," in gold foil lettering. I stepped back, hiding in the dark shadows of a perfectly manicured oak tree, watching the scene unfold. This was not just a simple gathering. They had moved to a rooftop club last Saturday. This was a massive, meticulously planned backyard gala that had clearly just ended hours ago. They had lied about the venue. They had lied about the date. They had thrown a lavish secret event right here at their own home, and the sheer overwhelming scale of the professional cleanup crew proved they had been planning to exclude me for months. They had hired high-end event planners, sent out expensive engraved invitations, and coordinated dozens of luxury vendors, all while looking me dead in the eye and smiling sweetly whenever I asked about my grandson's graduation. I slowly ran my thumb over the cold steel of the wrench hidden inside the box. Mason honestly thought he had built his perfect, shiny, elite life entirely on his own. He thought his expensive smart glass walls could permanently keep out the grease, dirt, and grit of the working-class woman who paid for his private schools and funded his first apartment. He was wrong, and he was about to find out exactly how fragile his beautiful glass walls could be when you hit them with solid forged steel. I drove straight back to my main office at the freight yard, tossing my keys onto the heavy oak desk. The silence in my office was shattered by the sharp, piercing ring of my private secure line. Only 3 people in the world had that number. I picked up the receiver. It was Arthur, the senior risk management director at the private wealth bank that handled my corporate assets. His voice, usually a calm monotone of financial jargon, was completely breathless, bordering on outright panic. "Gianna," Arthur said, skipping his usual pleasantries and diving straight into the crisis. "Our deep-level security protocols just tripped a massive red flag on a collateral transfer. Someone just initiated a high-yield, extremely aggressive venture loan application. The principal amount they are requesting is $10 million. I sat down slowly in my leather chair, staring out the window at my sprawling freight yard. $10 million under whose authorization? "Yours," Arthur replied, his voice dropping to a harsh, terrified whisper. "That is exactly why the automated system flagged it. The collateral listed for this $10 million payout is the entirety of Titan Freight's active operational fleet. All 500 of your heavy-duty rigs. Every single truck you own. They are trying to mortgage your entire life's work in one single transaction. The borrower listed on the application is a corporate entity registered as NovaCore. Do you know them?" A cold, poisonous knot twisted deep in my stomach, spreading a sickening warmth through my veins. Novacore was Mason and Chloe's precious artificial intelligence startup. The exact same startup they were aggressively pitching to the Silicon Valley elite. The company Chloe claimed was too prestigious to be associated with my dirty work boots. The digital guarantor signature, I said, my voice eerily calm despite the roaring betrayal echoing in my head. How did they bypass the banking authorization wall? That is the most terrifying part of this whole ordeal, Gianna, Arthur explained frantically, his keyboard clacking loudly in the background. The electronic signature is a 100% flawless match. It used your personal biometric security token. On paper, it looks exactly as if you personally walked into a branch, sat down with a loan officer, and signed away your entire fleet to fund this technology company. I am legally obligated by federal law to contact the authorities right now. Should I dispatch the police to their corporate address? No, I commanded, my tone slicing through the phone line like a razor blade. You will not call the police, Arthur. You will not alert the fraud department. You will freeze the actual transfer of funds on the back end, but I want you to manipulate the user interface to make it look like the loan is perfectly pending and processing normally. Keep them completely in the dark. I'm handling this internally. I hung up the phone before he could protest. Calling the police was the absolute worst move I could possibly make. An arrest would give Mason the perfect opportunity to play the victim. He would hire expensive defense lawyers and spin a pathetic narrative to the press about a vindictive, estranged mother trying to financially sabotage his brilliant tech career. I needed something far more destructive than a simple police report. I needed absolute, undeniable leverage that would strip him of everything. I opened my encrypted laptop and contacted Marcus. Marcus was not a standard cheap private detective. He was a former corporate espionage ghost I had kept on a very generous retainer for over a decade to protect my supply chains from rival freight cartels. I gave him a single, uncompromising directive. I told him to crack open Novacore's digital vaults and perform a total ruthless financial autopsy. 48 hours later, an unmarked black folder was hand-delivered directly to my desk. I poured myself a glass of black coffee, locked my office door, and opened the dossier. What I read was not just a profile of corporate mismanagement. It was a terrifying, meticulously documented blueprint of a catastrophic financial crime. Novacore was nothing but a hollow, glittering shell company. The revolutionary artificial intelligence software Mason had been boasting about on television and in magazines did not even exist. It was a complete phantom. They were secretly using cheap outsourced algorithms from overseas developers and dressing them up with expensive marketing terminology. But the deception went much deeper than a fake software product. Mason and Chloe were drowning in a toxic ocean of high-yield debt. They had borrowed millions of dollars from shadowy, unregulated venture capital syndicates and underground shadow lenders to fund their lavish lifestyle, their smart glass mansion, their luxury cars, and their endless public relations campaigns. They were bleeding cash at a terminal rate. The aggressive creditors were closing in on them, threatening to liquidate everything they owned. That was the real desperate reason Mason needed that $10 million so urgently. He was not using it for research or technology development. He was going to use it to pay off his immediate dangerous debts and to throw a massive, obscenely expensive product launch event next week. This launch event was a desperate final trap. He planned to use the fake hype from the event to scam massive institutional investment funds out of hundreds of millions of dollars, effectively passing his toxic, worthless debt onto clueless billionaires before the entire company collapsed under federal investigation. But one sickening question still lingered in my mind. How did my own son manage to duplicate my highly encrypted biometric security token to forge that fraudulent loan application? I turned to the final page of Marcus's investigation report, which contained a detailed, minute-by-minute digital access log. My eyes locked onto a specific timestamp from exactly 6 months ago. The breath caught in my throat, feeling like swallowed glass. 6 months ago, Mason had made a very rare, surprisingly affectionate visit to my house. He had brought an expensive bottle of wine, hugged me tightly, and claimed he just wanted to spend some quality time with his mother. I clearly remembered leaving my purse on the kitchen island when I went out to the garden to pick some fresh herbs for our dinner. According to the digital access logs, during that exact 10-minute window while my back was turned, my physical security token was temporarily cloned via a close-range wireless skimmer. He did not come to visit his mother that day. He came to steal the keys to her empire. He had smiled right in my face, eaten my food, and secretly plotted to use the heavy trucks I bought with 30 years of blood and sweat to save his own pathetic, fraudulent skin. The last remaining shred of maternal instinct I held for Mason evaporated into the cold, air-conditioned air of my office. He had drawn the battle lines using deceit and theft. Now he was going to learn exactly how a real corporate titan fights a war. The easiest thing in the world would have been to pick up my phone and call the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Federal agents would have raided his pristine glass mansion before breakfast. But as I sat in my quiet office staring at the damning evidence my investigator had compiled, I realized that sending my son to federal prison was simply not enough. In fact, an immediate arrest would have been a massive tactical error. The justice system is incredibly slow, bogged down by endless appeals and slick defense attorneys. Worse, it would give Mason a public stage. He would stand before a judge wearing one of his custom Italian suits and play the tragic victim. He would spin a heartbreaking tale for the media claiming his traditional, out-of-touch mother was trying to destroy his revolutionary startup out of petty jealousy. I refused to let him manipulate the narrative. I did not want a messy, prolonged court battle. I wanted a public execution, a complete, undeniable dismantling of his empire executed with surgical precision. To do that, I had to fundamentally transform myself. The woman who had packed his school lunches, paid for his expensive private tutors, and loved him unconditionally, had to die. In her place, the ruthless chief executive officer of Titan Freight took the wheel. I mentally severed the last remaining threads of maternal instinct. There was no sadness left in my chest, no lingering hope for reconciliation. There was only the cold, hard arithmetic of survival and the ironclad principle of punishing a traitor. I picked up my secure line and called Arthur back. I gave him a set of instructions that nearly gave the poor senior banker a heart attack. I ordered him to establish a heavily shielded anonymous offshore investment fund under a dummy corporation registered in the Cayman Islands. Once the shell was legally active, I authorized the transfer of $10 million of my own clean liquid capital into its accounts. I was not going to stop Mason from getting the money. Instead, I instructed my offshore proxies to approach the aggressive shadow venture capital syndicate that currently held all of Novacor's toxic debt. Buy it, I told my legal team. Buy every single cent of his outstanding debt. Offer them a 20% premium to sell it quietly and immediately. I want the paperwork signed by midnight. The shadow lenders were absolutely thrilled to cash out and wash their hands of what they knew was a sinking ship. The transaction was completed in total secrecy. And just like that, the entire financial landscape shifted beneath my son's feet without him feeling a single tremor. I officially became the sole legal creditor of Novacor. I held the master key to his entire corporate existence. Every computer server, every piece of leased office equipment, every fraudulent line of code they claimed to own it, all belonged to me. I held the absolute power of life and death over his company, and he was completely oblivious. With the trap fully set, I ordered Arthur to approve Mason's fraudulent loan application. I let the $10 million flow smoothly and unobstructed directly into Novacor's corporate accounts. I could perfectly imagine the scene in their glass mansion when the bank notification popped up on their screens. Mason and Chloe were likely popping expensive champagne toasting to their own twisted genius, entirely convinced they had outsmarted the banking system and thoroughly defeated the dumb blue-collar woman who raised him. They desperately needed that money to fund their massive product launch next week. I wanted them to have it. I wanted them to inflate their fragile, glittering balloon to its absolute maximum capacity right before I brought down the needle. 3 days before the highly anticipated tech launch, I drove my dusty pickup truck to a decaying 24-hour diner on the industrial outskirts of the city. Rain lashed against the cracked neon signs as I stepped inside. I walked past the empty counter and slid into a dimly lit back booth. Sitting across from me was a man wearing a nondescript dark jacket stirring a cup of black coffee. He was the lead architect of a ghost-tier cybersecurity firm I occasionally used for severe corporate espionage threats. He did not have a name, and I never asked for one. I slid a heavy manila envelope across the sticky laminate table. Inside was $50,000 in unmarked, non-sequential bills, along with a heavily encrypted flash drive containing the complete internal network architecture of the convention center where Novacore was hosting their event. Next Thursday night, my son is going to stand on a stage and lie to the entire world, I told the man, my voice barely rising above the hum of the diner's ancient refrigerator. He is broadcasting the event live to hundreds of thousands of online viewers and a room full of venture capitalists. I do not just want you to breach his network. I want you to own the building. I want complete overriding control of the main projector screens, the audio systems, and the live stream feed. When I give you the signal, you will lock his technical team completely out of their own control room. Can you do it? The man quietly opened the envelope, thumbed through the cash, and pocketed the drive. He did not smile. He simply gave me a single confirming nod before standing up and disappearing into the rainy night. I sat alone in the diner for a long time, watching the rain wash the dirt off the pavement outside. The trap was flawless. The noose was tied, measured, and perfectly disguised as a golden crown. Mason thought he was about to step onto the grandest stage of his life to become a billionaire. He had no idea he was actually walking straight to the gallows. The night of the Novacore product launch arrived, draped in the kind of suffocating synthetic opulence that only stolen money could buy. They had rented out the grand atrium at the city's most astronomically expensive convention center. Walking into that hall was like stepping inside a massive, tasteless diamond. Giant towers of imported white orchids choked the air with an overpowering, sickly sweet fragrance that made my stomach turn. Laser light shows painted the towering ceiling with holographic company logos, while waiters in pristine white tuxedos circulated through the crowd carrying trays of champagne that cost $3,000 a single bottle. The room was packed shoulder to shoulder with the elite titans of Silicon Valley. Several dozen top-tier venture capitalists, angel investors, and tech journalists mingled, swirling their crystal glasses. Surrounding the perimeter of the room were massive camera rigs and blinding production lights broadcasting the entire farce live to over 500,000 viewers across the globe. It was a flawless, glittering illusion, funded entirely by my stolen trucks. Up on the massive elevated stage, Mason and Chloe played the role of the ultimate technology power couple to absolute perfection. Mason strutted under the spotlights wearing a bespoke Italian suit that easily cost $15,000. He flashed his capped, perfectly white teeth at the cameras, oozing the greasy, rehearsed charm of a daytime television host. Chloe stood off to the side, clapping her manicured hands and dripping in leased diamonds that caught the stage lights like tiny strobe flashes. She wore an evening gown that looked like liquid silver, smiling a vacant, robotic smile for the photographers while whispering fake pleasantries to the executives in the front. But right there in the very front row, sitting in a plush velvet VIP chair, was the only piece of reality in the entire room. My grandson, Leo. They had forced the 17-year-old prodigy into a stiff, uncomfortable black suit, using him as a pathetic public relations prop to show off their perfect family image. I could see the dark circles under his eyes even from the back of the hall. He looked utterly exhausted, his shoulders slumped in complete defeat. He stared blankly at his polished shoes, visibly sickened by the hollow, fraudulent lifestyle his parents were parading in front of the world. The massive digital screens behind the stage flashed the Novacore logo, and Mason stepped up to the crystal podium. He gripped the edges of the stand, adopting a serious visionary posture as the room fell into a reverent, breathless silence. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mason began, his voice echoing through the state-of-the-art sound system. "When we started this journey, people told us we were dreaming too big. They said true innovation was impossible without massive corporate backing. But Novacore was not built on handouts. It was built on a foundation of unshakable business ethics, radical transparency, and raw, unfiltered honesty. I stood in the shadows at the back of the hall, listening to him spew this absolute garbage. "I stand before you today as a completely self-made man," he continued, placing a hand over his heart, perfectly acting out the role of the humble genius. "I did not rely on family money. I did not inherit a legacy. I faced incredible adversity. Chloe and I built this revolutionary artificial intelligence platform from absolute zero with our own two bare hands and a relentless dedication to truth. That was my exact cue. I pushed the heavy brass-handled double doors of the main entrance wide open. I did not wear an expensive evening gown. I did not wear a designer suit. I walked into the most exclusive technology gala of the decade, wearing my faded silver-streaked khaki work coveralls and my heavily scuffed, oil-stained steel-toed boots. My hair was tied back in a messy bun, and I carried the heavy mahogany box containing Leo's graduation gift firmly under my arm. The heavy rhythmic thud of my steel boots against the polished marble floor cut through Mason's speech like a gunshot. The sea of billionaires, venture capitalists, and tech moguls instinctively parted for me. They scrambled out of my way, pulling their silk ties and expensive designer dresses back as if my blue-collar grit was a highly contagious disease. The smell of diesel and sweat radiated from my clothes, completely overpowering the expensive perfumes in the room. I walked straight down the center aisle, my face a mask of absolute, unyielding stone. Up on the stage, the blood drained from Mason's face so fast he looked like a chalk outline. His confident, visionary smile collapsed into a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. Chloe actually dropped her champagne glass. It shattered violently against the stage floor, but the sound was completely swallowed by the sudden dead silence of the entire room. Mason frantically waved his hands, signaling the massive muscular security guard stationed near the podium. He clearly thought I was just a bitter crazy mother crashing his party to make an emotional scene or cry for justice in front of his investors. The guards immediately rushed forward, reaching out with their heavy hands to grab my shoulders and physically throw me out into the street, but they stopped dead in their tracks. They backed away slowly, their hands raised in sudden submission. They did not back down because they respected me. They backed down because of the people walking closely behind me. Flanking my left and right were the three most ruthless, high-powered corporate litigation attorneys in the entire state, dressed in immaculate gray suits. And directly behind them marched a squad of 6 grim-faced, heavily armed county sheriffs and financial enforcement officers. The lead officer stepped forward, the gold badge on his chest catching the bright stage lights, holding a brightly stamped federal court order for a total immediate asset seizure. The glittering stage was completely set, the cameras were rolling to hundreds of thousands of people, and it was finally time to pull the curtain down on the greatest show of his pathetic life. I did not wait for an invitation. I marched straight up the acrylic stairs of the stage. Mason stood completely paralyzed, his mouth opening and closing silently like a suffocating fish. As I reached the podium, he finally managed to stammer a single pathetic word. "Mom!" I did not answer him. I reached out, grabbed his $15,000 lapel with my grease-stained hand, and violently shoved him aside. He stumbled backward, tripping over his own expensive leather shoes and crashing heavily into a towering floral arrangement. I took his place at the crystal podium. I pulled a sleek silver USB drive from the front pocket of my coveralls and jammed it directly into the master presentation console. Instantly, the massive glittering Novacore logo on the 60-foot digital screen behind me flickered and died. The perfectly curated laser light show abruptly snapped off. In its place, the massive screen illuminated with stark, blinding white light displaying high-resolution scans of highly classified legal documents. Right in the center, magnified for hundreds of thousands of live viewers, and every billionaire in the room to see, was the fraudulent venture loan contract for $10 million. Next to it was the biometric signature log clearly detailing the forged security token. I grabbed the microphone, my grip as tight as if I were holding my heavy steel wrench. I looked dead into the main broadcast camera, then swept my cold gaze across the sea of shocked venture capitalists in the front rows. Ladies and gentlemen, and the hundreds of thousands of people watching this broadcast live across the world, I announced, my voice echoing like thunder through the cavernous hall. My name is Gianna Nichols. I am the sole owner and chief executive officer of Titan Freight and Salvage. The man cowering on the floor behind me did not build a technology empire from scratch. He built a criminal enterprise using stolen identity and extreme financial fraud. A massive wave of gasps and frantic whispers erupted across the convention hall. The flashing bulbs of the press cameras shifted from Mason directly to me, blindingly bright. 6 months ago, I continued, projecting every syllable with absolute ruthless clarity, Mason Nichols illegally cloned my highly classified biometric security token. He used my digital identity to forge the loan application you now see on the screen behind me. He secretly mortgaged all 500 of my heavy-duty freight trucks. He gambled my entire life's work to secure $10 million in toxic high-yield debt from an unregulated shadow syndicate. He did this because Novacore's artificial intelligence software is a complete, unmitigated lie. They possess zero proprietary technology. They are completely bankrupt, drowning in debt, and this entire launch party is nothing more than a desperate, pathetic attempt to trap your institutional funds before the federal authorities catch up with them. The crowd of investors began to physically recoil. You could hear the sudden scraping of chairs and the panicked shuffling of expensive shoes as billionaires realized they were standing in the exact epicenter of a massive federal crime scene. Chloe suddenly snapped out of her shocked paralysis. Her perfectly contoured face twisted into an ugly, feral mask of pure panic. She sprinted across the stage, her silver evening gown tearing at the hem, and lunged for the spare microphone resting on the edge of the podium. "Do not listen to a single word she is saying," Chloe shrieked, her voice cracking hysterically. She pointed a trembling diamond-covered finger at my face. "This woman is severely mentally ill. She is having a total psychotic break. She has been insanely jealous of Mason's success for years, and she fabricated all of these documents to destroy our family. Security, get her out of here. Arrest her right now." I did not even flinch. I slowly turned my head and looked down at her with absolute disgust. "You do not have the authority to arrest anyone in this building, Chloe," I said smoothly into my microphone, completely overpowering her hysterical screeching, "because you do not own a single thing in this room. You see, I did not just come here as a victim of identity theft. I came here as your master." I clicked the presentation remote in my hand and the giant screen shifted to a new set of documents. These were the heavily redacted offshore transfer papers from the Cayman Islands. "Instead of calling the police when I discovered the theft," I declared, my voice ringing with total, uncompromising authority, "I legally established an anonymous offshore investment fund. I used my own clean capital to completely buy out the $10 million debt from your shadow lenders. I bought it at a massive premium. As of 48 hours ago, my fund is the sole absolute legal creditor of Novacore. I own 100% of your outstanding debt. I own the servers. I own the patents. I own the chairs your investors are sitting on, and I own the very stage you are standing on." The realization hit the room like a physical shockwave. The seasoned venture capitalists did not need to hear another word. They recognized a total corporate slaughter when they saw one. Panic erupted. The elite titans of Silicon Valley began sprinting for the exit doors, shouting into their cell phones, frantically calling their legal teams to aggressively distance themselves from Mason's toxic crater of a company. "And because you have actively committed severe federal fraud," I announced, raising my voice over the chaotic stampede of fleeing billionaires, "you have triggered the immediate criminal default clause in your lending agreement. I am officially executing a total, uncompromising debt recall. Right here. Right now. Live on the air." I pulled my cell phone from my pocket and hit a single button, sending a blank text message to the anonymous cybersecurity architect I had hired. Less than 2 seconds later, the execution happened. Every single computer monitor on the stage suddenly flashed violently red before going completely dead black. The massive digital server racks displayed in the background powered down with a loud, heavy mechanical groan. The wireless network for the entire building crashed entirely. The flashy holographic lights above us snapped off, leaving the stage illuminated only by the harsh, unforgiving glare of the emergency work lights. Simultaneously, the squad of county sheriffs surged forward. They bypassed the fleeing investors and swarmed the stage. The lead officer held up his court order and began loudly reading the asset seizure protocols. Heavily armed deputies immediately began ripping cables out of the presentation consoles, slapping bright red federal seizure tape across the camera rigs, the soundboards, and the crystal podium. It was a complete systematic annihilation of his entire existence. Mason slowly crawled out from behind the shattered floral arrangement. His custom $15,000 suit was wrinkled and stained with spilled water. His perfectly styled hair was a disheveled, sweaty mess. He looked around the stage, watching the police tag his equipment and watching the empty doors where his billionaire targets had just fled. The massive, beautiful illusion he had spent years building had been completely vaporized in less than 5 minutes. He collapsed completely, his knees slamming hard against the glass floor of the stage. He looked up at me, his eyes wide, bloodshot, and overflowing with genuine pathetic terror. The arrogant technology chief executive officer was entirely gone, replaced by a terrified, broken little boy who had just been caught stealing. He crawled toward me, his hands reaching out to desperately grab the cuffs of my dusty work coveralls. Tears streamed down his face, ruining his expensive television makeup. "Mom!" he sobbed, his voice breaking into a wretched, desperate wail that was picked up by the few remaining active broadcast microphones. "Mom, please, please stop this. You are destroying my life. I am your son. Please, Mom, you cannot do this to me. I am your flesh and blood." I looked down at the pathetic creature groveling at my steel-toed boots. I felt absolutely nothing. No pity, no remorse, no motherly warmth. I slowly reached down, grabbed his wrist, and forcefully peeled his trembling fingers off my clothing. I leaned in close, ensuring the microphone caught every single icy syllable of my response. "In business, there are no mothers and sons," I said, my voice as cold and hard as the steel wrench in my pocket. "There are only thieves and debt collectors, and your bill is officially past due." Exactly 7 days after the live broadcast, Novacor was nothing but ash scattered in the wind. The federal liquidation was swift, ruthless, and entirely public. Mason and Chloe were immediately completely submerged in a massive ocean of criminal subpoenas and civil lawsuits from furious investors. Their multi-million-dollar smart glass mansion was aggressively foreclosed by the bank, along with their leased luxury vehicles and heavily mortgaged designer assets. It was pouring heavy freezing rain when they finally showed up outside the massive wrought iron gates of my shipping yard. I sat inside my warm, dry office, watching them on the high-definition security monitors. They were completely soaked to the bone, shivering violently, and entirely stripped of all their polished high society arrogance. Mason pressed his face against the metal call box, frantically buzzing the intercom and sobbing uncontrollably into the speaker. He begged me to open the gates and show mercy. He swore he would change his ways, that he would start completely over, and that he and Chloe would humbly take care of me in my old age if I just paid for their defense attorneys and forgave their massive debt. I did not walk down into the cold rain to meet them. I simply reached forward and pressed the microphone button on my desk console. "Mason," I said, my voice echoing metallic, steady, and cold through the outdoor yard speakers. "The true price of maturity is taking absolute personal responsibility for your own signature. You built your beautiful glass house on lies, and now you must live in the broken pieces. Do not ever bring yourselves to this property again." I released the button and permanently disconnected the outdoor audio feed. Through the silent camera screens, I watched those two miserable hollow failures slowly turn around and trudge away down the muddy, industrial road, completely disappearing into the thick gray downpour. Just as they vanished from sight, a battered, cheap yellow city taxi pulled up to the curb directly in front of the gates. The passenger door swung open and a tall, thin figure stepped out into the rain. It was Leo. He was no longer wearing that stifling, uncomfortable luxury suit they had forced on him at the gala. He wore a simple, faded, hooded sweatshirt and carried a heavily worn canvas backpack slung securely over one shoulder. He walked right up to the pedestrian gate and pressed the buzzer. I grabbed my heavy umbrella and walked down from my office to the perimeter fence. When I reached the gate, Leo looked at me through the wet steel bars. The dark, exhausted circles under his eyes were completely gone. His gaze was sharp, fiercely focused, and incredibly clear. "I left them," Leo said, his voice projecting steadily over the sound of the rain. "I packed my bags the exact night of the gala and walked out of that house. I knew they were living a massive, pathetic lie for years, Grandma. I just did not know how to permanently escape it until you showed up. I officially declined every single job offer from the Silicon Valley recruiters yesterday afternoon." He unzipped his wet backpack, completely ignoring the rain soaking his clothes. He did not ask for a single cent to bail his parents out of federal custody. He did not ask for a handout. Instead, he pulled out a thick binder filled with complex handwritten logistical code and passed it to me through the iron bars. "I wrote a custom routing algorithm," Leo explained, wiping the cold rain from his forehead. "It is designed specifically to optimize Titan Freight's entire global supply chain. It will cut your fleet's fuel consumption by 15% and massively increase delivery efficiency across all 500 of your active trucks. But I do not want to be an executive. I do not want to be a manager. I want an entry-level internship. I want to start by carrying heavy boxes on the loading dock. For the very first time in what felt like an eternity, a genuine, profound smile broke across my weathered face. I punched my security code into the keypad, and the heavy iron gates slowly swung open. I reached deep into the pockets of my coveralls, pulled out a thick pair of heavy leather work gloves, and tossed them firmly to my grandson. "Starting from absolute zero is going to be very dirty and extremely painful," I warned him, the warmth finally returning to my soul. Leo easily caught the heavy gloves, a bright, deeply confident smile perfectly mirroring my own. "That is exactly what a real foundation is," he replied. I turned around, and together my grandson and I walked toward the roaring, brightly lit warehouse, stepping out of the bitter rain and into the warm, golden light of the early morning sun. Hello, dear listeners, and thank you so much for staying with me until the very end of this journey. I would love to know where you are listening to this story from today, so please let me know down in the comments. If you found today's story engaging and meaningful, please consider helping us out with just $1. You can easily support us by scanning the PayPal QR code currently on your screen, or by clicking the PayPal link in the description or the pinned comment below. Your generous $1 donation gives our channel the essential budget to pay our hardworking staff, allowing them to feed their families and continue creating even better stories to serve you. Thank you for your incredible kindness, and I will see you in the next one.